Hi, everyone. My name is Betsy Stratton. I'm with the National Renewable Energy Lab, and I'll be facilitating today's unconference. Thank you for joining us for the Texas Water Resiliency session. Your speakers today are Bill Norris, Kyle Frazier, Paul Chulis, Mark Ellison, Carlos Rubenstein, and Justin Sutherland. We're going to get started with the presentation at this time. The session will be recorded. I ask that you remain muted unless speaking. And then otherwise, feel free to enter any questions in the chat box at any point in this session, and we will come back around to those during the Q&A session if time allows. So thank you. And all right, ready when you are.
All right, thank you, Betsy. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon or good morning if you're on the West Coast. And we had some time issues, I guess, trying to figure out where we were and what time it was. So I think we're all here. And Betsy introduced our panelists, which are all served with the Texas Desalination Association. Just a little bit about the association. We were established a decade ago. We promote and encourage better use of water resources in Texas. And we accomplish this by a strong advocacy of state and local officials, the public, the industry leaders, and other stakeholders. And just to kind of go into the segue for the panel, we have numerous challenges ahead of us that we will cover today, from drought to flooding, freezing, and water security, and thus the need for diversification in Texas. Not to mention the extreme growth that we have in the cities of people coming in thinking that Texas is the best place to live. So without further ado, I've got a couple of questions here that I may call on a panel member, or we may just, as we said before, this may just be a free-for-all. But all these guys are experts in their field and bring a lot to the table. And so kind of the need for the diversification in Texas, let's take a look at the overview of water supply needs. And I might want to call on Kyle for that, because I know that Kyle is our executive administrator for the association, and he's been that since we started the organization. And you want to address that, Kyle?
Sure, Bill. Thanks. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Texas, certainly over the last decade, and actually longer, that has experienced explosive growth in population. Some counts put it in the neighborhood of 1,000 people a day moving to the state. Just for perspective, that's a city the size of Fort Worth coming to the state every year. And it didn't really slow down a whole lot during the COVID situation. There's still a lot of people coming to Texas. Traditionally, we have depended on surface water for much of our water needs across the state, and for many years that was sufficient. That is becoming less and less true as our major metropolitan areas continue to expand. And we have not done just a tremendous amount over the last 50 years about doing something to mitigate that growth and to deal with it. And it's that with the coupled with our what seems to be perpetual drought situation. At least half the state seems to be in drought almost all the time now. It presents some real challenges to the folks who are trying to supply water. And over the last 10 years since the association's been in existence, that's something we've tried to address both through regulatory and through statutory means, and have had some level of success in doing that. But we're still, I would say, behind the 8 ball and still in need of new resources. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about this today.
Okay. Anybody else want to add to that? I know that we focus on desalination and as an alternative, and I would say that 15 years ago it was unheard of. It wasn't in any water supply strategy. So we had a lot of work to do. Anybody want to add kind of overview?
I'll just add a few thoughts. Kyle is spot on. And one of the problems with the 1,000 people a day that are coming to Texas is that none of them are bringing water with them. And that's adding pressure to the sources of water that we have, whether it be groundwater or surface water. Surface water in the state has been fully adjudicated for years. So there's no new sources of surface water of any magnitude unless we create new reservoirs. And those are so long in the permitting process that they're few and far between. Coupled with the problems that Kyle mentioned is also the fact that our existing sources of water are declining. Whether it's surface water that is declining because our reservoirs, like all reservoirs do all over the world, are silting up and losing capacity, or our groundwater sources of water are declining because we're mining them a rate higher than they're recharging. The state water plan documents anywhere from, I believe, an 11% to 17% loss in supply over the planning horizon. And so that coupled with the explosive growth that we're seeing adds to the pressures for diversification.
Okay.
Bill, I've got one other thing to add, and I agree with everything that Kyle and Carlos mentioned. I think we also need to consider that there's a tremendous amount of industry moving to the state. And some of these industries consume a considerable amount of water. But to give you an example, the Exxon Sabic plant in Corpus Christi is going to consume over 20 million, or in and around 20 million gallons of water a day. The new steel mill that's going in is about 5 to 6 million gallons of water a day. And so that's in addition to all of the people that are moving to the state. And this kind of accelerates the movement of people coming to the state because, there's a lot of jobs that this is all bringing. And Austin is bringing, Tesla and other people. So all major water consumers.
Okay. Well, let's kind of go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and I was just going to add to that. I mean, those are hit upon a lot of the technical issues and kind of societal issues. But one of the things that I think, especially during the freeze we had back in February, that made just really a stark comparison is that the public perception of things that they've taken for granted, like power and water and so on, and doing that advocacy to let people know what's going on. I mean, as long as people have water coming out of their tap, they just have little appreciation that the water supplies are, as Carlos was saying, dwindling for various reasons. And I think that's an important point that from a technical standpoint, we sometimes forget. We're all here talking about water. But when I go and talk to people in the general public, that is not the first and foremost thing on their mind. And we have pockets around the state like El Paso where water is a part of their city culture, but that's not the case in many parts of the state. And I think those are things that need to be brought to the forefront as well to help with that advocacy.
Okay. Well, as we get into the water, is the ownership of water. It's mine and not yours. And sometimes we don't share very well across the state. You have the haves and the have-nots. And my contention is that if we work together, if Dallas is out of water and East Texas is full of water, East Texas is not going to survive if Dallas doesn't. So, that's just kind of an example. So what are your thoughts on the complications and maybe, what is needing the diversification? What can you say related to the ownership of water, and where can we go from here to expand our horizons?
I'll take a crack at that one. It has been further complicated in the recent past by the fact that a product that many people never thought was much of an asset has become that, and that's our huge amount of brackish groundwater. That for years, not a lot of attention was paid to it. We're realizing now with work that the Water Board's done and identifying just how much and where that water is, that it's got new value. And so that's going to be not just our freshwater sources that we have to think about ownership, but our brackish assets also. And now on top of that, another emerging good news, tricky news, is produced water. That we have a huge amount of produced water as a result of oil and gas drilling. It was always thought of as a waste product, but many of our Texas Desal members have the technology and the know-how to be able to treat that. And so now that is another aspect of water ownership that is very tricky. It's great that we've got that other groundwater, but we're going to have to sort through some water law that dates back to when we were a Spanish colony. So there's a bit of work to do there, but the asset's been identified exactly. Building a business model around it and related to ownership will be a tricky scenario.
Yeah, and Mark's absolutely right, and the ownership of groundwater is, as you can imagine, extraordinarily a contentious issue that we deal with in the legislature almost every session, and then the courts deal with when we're not in session. And as you can imagine, two owners over a lock reservoir, one wanting to make use of their what they consider their property and their ability to sell or do something with that property in some fashion, and the neighbor who doesn't want them to do that. And that is an ongoing battle that occurs almost every day. And then you add to the interaction between service and groundwater, and how you figure out the ownership in that situation, especially as you get closer to rivers and those types of bodies of water. It is an amazing complex problem, and we have an old saying in Texas: whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting, and we fight over water a lot. And near as I can tell, it's not going to be solved anytime soon. So that just adds to the complexity of the issue.
You know, you may want to also address the other thing we forgot, Kyle, and that's aquifer storage and recovery. That while the technology and the know-how has been developed to be able to do that, here again, ownership comes back in to be a question.
Well, that and I think at the highest level, we have conflict there as well. I mean, the water is owned, surface water is owned by the state. It is held in trust by the state, but the person that owns the surface water right has a property interest. And Bill alluded in his question about a perfect example where that becomes a problem, where there is surface water needs in Dallas, and there may be surface water abundance in East Texas. And even though in both places the surface water is owned by the state, the regional aspect of this is my water and you're not going to take it because you're cheating me out of my potential for economic growth comes into play. On the groundwater side, at the very highest level, even before we get to ASR or brackish, is the rule of capture that's been with us since 1903. And basically is, and then you have the court decisions that say that now you own water in place. What does that mean? I mean, what if I want to conserve my water in place? And how far down do we want to go with that? So all of that ends up complicating the issue as well. But I also think, as Mark has stated in various examples, groundwater desalination, brackish groundwater desalination, or seawater desalination can be viewed as an augmentation of existing supplies. And by capturing those market opportunities and truly adding to our water portfolio, we would be better positioned to meet our future needs.
Well, one of the things that I don't see anybody taking ownership of the ocean, so that eliminates one of those issues. There's other issues associated with that, but ownership is not one of them. And the other thing is, our rivers and they have water rights, and people buy and sell those water rights like real estate, and those keep going up as well. And most of those are over allocated anyway. So in times of drought, they may not be available. And so there's just a wide range of complications related to that. Anything else related to ownership that anybody want to throw in?
Bill, just when you talk about seawater, there is a fee that you pay the state for, I think for every million or every however many acre feet you take from that surface water, which is the ocean. So you got to pay TCEQ a fee.
One other thing too, and I know near and dear to Carlos's heart since he's fought the battles, we also have what may be the fastest growing part of the state in many ways, the Rio Grande Valley, where we share a river, where we've got rapid population growth on this side, on the other side of the river, and huge environmental concerns. And that is kind of a ticking time bomb that when you look at from El Paso to Brownsville, that's a shared asset. And both Carlos, you and Bill are very familiar with it, and that presents a whole other set of challenges.
And having said that, and I agree with you, Mark, if it is not handled adequately, the disputes on the Rio Grande may very well extend to the entire U.S.-Mexico border, because the dispute over the treaty is the same treaty that also causes us to share water out of the Colorado with Mexico. And so right now, while the acute problems, well, not really acute, chronic problems have been on the Rio Grande between Texas and Mexico, a lack of a resolution can very well not only continue to affect the U.S.-Mexico relationship, but affect all of the border states.
And to tie this a little bit back to, the population growth, someone may ask, well, this sounds pretty kind of screwed up. I mean, what you got, the system you've got now, and what Carlos was talking about in 1903, and we were talking about, the international treaties that were in the 1940s, and cases that have stretched the last 100 years. But at the time that they were, that those laws were passed, and things were adjudicated over that period of time, the results made sense. Where it's really become an issue is in recent history, where we have had this population growth, and all of a sudden we're bumping elbows with our neighbors, whereas 50 to 100 years ago we weren't. And so these issues of property rights were less of an issue, but now they are an issue. Now we're having to deal with them in a very serious way.
And ultimately, just one other quick thought. As our state becomes a more and more urban state, and as the political powers move away from rural communities into urban areas, I can tell you ultimately these urban areas, the city of Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin, San Antonio, and Houston, are not going to allow themselves to run out of water, and they will go to the areas where the water exists, and they will take it, and they'll have the political force to be able to do that. So it's it poses just some really significant challenges over the next 50 years.
Yeah, one thing that, not to say good or bad about groundwater districts, they govern over the groundwater. Obviously, is their task is to make sure it's used wisely in many cases. But it's to note that the three largest brackish desalination plants are not in a groundwater district, which would be Brownsville, San Antonio, and El Paso. So I don't know if that's a coincidence, but I know Brownsville's already expanded theirs, and they treat more water than the other ones just because provides 40% of their supply. So just an interesting tidbit. It's kind of related to ownership, and maybe the groundwater districts think it's their water somewhat, and sometimes, and there's good groundwater districts out there, and we try to work with them to try to be practical and use the science to use the water wisely.
Well, San Antonio intentionally moved their plant out of a county that was governed by a GCD to one that didn't have a groundwater conservation district. So I don't think any of the three were a coincidence.
Yeah, no. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. So let's talk about water portfolios and the development of new sources. I mean, a lot of entities have the pleasure of dual sources of water or, triple sources of water. And they sit in pretty good standing when it comes to, various things that could interrupt their supply. So what are the advantages of having a portfolio and in the development of the new sources? And I'll just throw that out, whoever talks first.
Well, I think a perfect example of why you need to have a diversified portfolio is what happened in the 2011 drought, where we had senior calls made because of 2011 was the worst one-year drought of record in Texas history, right? Weather history that's recorded. We know we've had worse droughts than that. And we had many municipalities that had never had a shortage before, all of a sudden having to curtail use, particularly along the Brazos River, that for the first time saw senior calls on surface water. None of those municipalities, Bill, really had a diversified portfolio. And to make things worse, a vast majority of them also had very junior water rights. And so if you want to drive the point home of why it is important to have a diversified portfolio, what the state experienced in 2011 and likely to experience again if we have another drought that rivals 2011 is the need to be able to diversify, particularly with the points that have been made already by the panelists about the increased need for water, not just for our population, but for industrial development.
Okay.
And I would say, a specific example, again, keeping it within Texas, is El Paso. I mean, again, a community that has to focus. I mean, it's part of their community culture is water. And I will admit that, when they built their desal plant, it is a bit of a special case. The federal government did step in to pay for a lot of that. But aside from that, I mean, they having it when we did go into the droughts that Carlos is talking about and things later on. And again, they are in kind of they see drought before a lot of the rest of the state really sees drought. I mean, they don't operate, they have about 27.5 MGD of capacity. And under normal circumstances where they can use their other water supplies, they're operating that plant at a fraction. When those other water supplies go away, they were able to turn that desal plant up to full capacity if they wanted to, and they did get close during some of the droughts. And it's interesting, during that period of time, we had a lot of our clients call us and say, hey, we're looking for alternative water sources now. Well, you're in the middle of a drought. It's a little bit late to be looking at an alternative water source for this drought. But the one entity that wasn't really looking for a new water source was El Paso. When they were working on projects, and certainly projects they're doing now, they're looking at the next drought. They've already got themselves water secure for this one. They're looking at the next one. And then on the other side of that, you may say, well, okay, so they had the federal government pay for it. I can't have the federal government pay for it. And it's an expensive source of water. But, something I hear from all corners of the water industry is, yeah, it's expensive, but how much does it cost when you don't have the water?
On that one, let me comment two examples. One here in Austin, the city of Austin, the biggest water customer is Samsung Semiconductor. And they were shut down for over a month. No water, no power to be able to get started. And we've had petrochemical facilities along the coast went through the same thing. What we're hearing more and more is, while earlier on in desal, mainly seawater desal, people would argue with you about a penny here and a penny there. Well, when they run out of water and they go a month without generating any revenue at a plant because they're out of water, that's changed things. These risk managers at these facilities have perked up, and they're looking at ways to where, like the Australians had found, that it pays to have that capacity there that you can turn on and initialize. Our company based in Israel has had to deal with it to always be looking over the horizon. and have integrated the desal option into society. And throughout the world, you can see other places doing the same thing. We'll have to do that here at some point, just like in the late 50s and the early 60s. We knew we had to build reservoirs, and we did it. And we're at that stage again now, and we've got the technology to do it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take
but it will not be the same cost of water as the early 60s.
No, new water is a lot more expensive than old water.
Yeah.
And old water is not as reliable as new water. So I'm going to take there's some good questions, and I'll get back to some more if we don't have any, but I want to make sure we answer some of the audiences. So this is related to seawater. It says, given the need for water in Texas, what do you see as the leading hurdles for seawater desal? Cost, environmental impacts, technology, or other? Paul, I think since you've been kind of close, you've been drinking seawater for a couple of years now without treating it yet, so that's why you talk different.
It is one of the reasons I talk different. Seawater desal, I guess the focus of Corpus Christi is around seawater desalination. There's a tremendous amount of growth in Corpus Christi, a lot of industrial growth, and a lot of people moving to the region. So, and plus we're in a drought, so it's becoming a bigger issue. The challenge with the seawater desal is the city is looking at 2 projects. The Port Authority is looking at 2 projects, and then some private developers are also looking at some projects. So from a public's perspective, there's confusion in that there's a lot of people looking at a desal plant installing, and there is actually an existing seawater desal plant, about 10 MGD, sitting in Corpus now that is not being used, but will be used at some time in the future. So I think the challenge is understanding who's kind of closest to actually getting something to move, and that's most likely the city. But the port continues to pursue permits in nearby locations. So there's confusion, but there is some movement. I don't know if that answers all of the questions, other than just it confuses everybody.
Let me add to that a bit. And like I said, Paul's experience is valuable for all of us. The big thing that you got to get over the hurdle on is that it will cost more. But I think as we have conversations with people along the coast, when you start laying out what that water might cost today, they're surprised that because of technological developments, that price has come down over time. Mainly energy efficiency in the plants, how to cycle them. And so the technology is there. The other key thing that gets back into water planning in the state of Texas and ownership also is you have an economies of scale in a desal plant. That water coming out of a 150 or 200 million gallon a day plant versus a 5 MGD plant is going to be cheaper, and you get some efficiencies, and you can serve and distribute that water even through some existing infrastructure. So we have to look at the ocean as a prime reservoir that we don't have to dig. We don't lose half the water like we do in reservoirs in West Texas, but it's new and it's different. We think, and numerous members of the association have the technology that we can deal with brine issues. If you look around the world, desal plant construction is in full tilt. And so we're in a bit of a catch-up mode, but it can be done. And there are companies that know how to do it, including ours. And so it's that will to make that choice to pay that price because you're going to pay sooner or later.
And to follow on that, I think it goes back to, again, public perception. of it, because I mean, I can think of a study I've seen where this was centered in California, where they were looking at the cost of state project water and the Colorado River to the energy and all the pumping that goes to bring that water from northern Texas or Colorado or from across into California basically, and comparing that to the cost of seawater desalination, say along the somewhere along the California coast. And as it turns out, I mean, our perception is that that surface water is cheaper because it started off cheaper. But once you add all the pumping costs, as it turns out, seawater desalination ends up being cheaper, and probably more environmentally friendly in that perspective.
I'm going to take a little bit of a sidestep on what's been responded to, not because I disagree, I agree wholeheartedly. I think another impediment is poor permitting processes. And what I mean by that is not the regulatory agency. I'm 100% convinced that the regulatory agency can and will issue permits that are protective of the environment. And I'm 100% convinced, as Mark has stated, that the technology exists to properly treat the water in a way that it meets the end goal and it doesn't degrade the water quality locally. What I'm focusing on is in pursuing these new type permits, the lack of outreach to folks that may have a found or an unfound concern can become the biggest impediment. Because if you don't address those properly as the person that is pursuing the permit, you're going to end up in a contested case. And again, if you didn't plan appropriately, you may end up losing your case or having to expend additional effort in the permitting. And so it behooves those that are interested in doing desal to ensure that they get to address in a very open and transparent manner early on the concerns that are likely to come from the area.
We also are spoiled in the sense that many of the areas charge less than $1 per 1,000 gallons for their water. And when you go to $3 or $4 a 1,000 gallons or even more, it's just not enough. Water's too cheap, and it should be a better commodity than that, more valuable commodity. Let's move on. I had another question here. Let me see. Peter, you said that you were depressed now, and you may not move to Texas after all, to Austin, because you may not have water. So let's lighten it up here a little bit and say, is there anything good related to what we're doing? What are we excited about?
Let me just, and I would just something. I would suggest this, that the thing that has impressed me the most is we have figured out a way to overcome the problem. And if we are good at anything, we are good at that. And we may not plan efficiently or long-term enough, but when we're presented with a problem, we pull together and we figure it out. And we've got, so Peter, come on to Austin, and I promise you, you'll be able to get some water.
You're gonna have to do better than that, friends. You're gonna have to do a little bit better than that. I need to hear more. I need to hear something. Tell me what's your favorite. What are you most like in terms of plants that are coming online in the next few years? Which ones do you think are going to be most kind of like sentinels for the future of Texas water?
Let me take a crack at that. What I'm excited about is our permitting process is a heck of a lot more efficient in itself, if you properly manage it, than other states. The regulatory agency, the TCEQ, is a one-shop location. You don't have to worry about having to get multiple permits for multiple agencies, and so that is a plus. When it comes to state funding for projects, you're going to be hard-pressed to find more attractive funding that is available from the state that can also be utilized in conjunction with private capital investment. So those things excite me. The other one is the state has the ability to participate in a project, to right size a project, and take on those costs to keep costs down overall and sell those state participation interests to new uses that will come online down the road. That's exciting. And I think one of the other things that I'm excited about is 2 sessions ago, we all worked to pass a bill that was actually one of the few water bills the governor signed that session that allowed the benefits of a city along the coast that has existing surface water rights from a river, right, that now takes advantage of seawater desalination for them to market in an expedited manner on a term basis the surface water rights and therefore extend the benefits of those projects along the coast further inland. So if you're looking for positive things, those are very positive things. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find other states that can equal that list.
Hey, and Peter, and I'll give you another thing that's specific. It's something we worked on this session, and Mark kind of alluded to it on the produced water end. We have a bill that, knock on wood, will be. It's already passed the House, and I'm sorry, already passed the Senate. It should be in the House floor next week, and I believe, and the governor will sign it. Is the creation of a consortium to study produced water and how it can be utilized and cleaned up and made into a substance that that can augment our water supply. This is an exciting effort. The state's going to put some money in, private industry is going to put some money in, and it is it's taking what is a huge issue, something neighborhood of 8 billion barrels of produced water a year. And instead of wasting it, put it down whole, we're going to figure out a way to make use of it and help replenish our depleted aquifers. So that's an exciting project that's moving forward, and I think we're going to see great results from that.
Kyle, and to add to that, the positive action that was taken here a few months ago to where now the Railroad Commission, working with TCEQ, can issue MPDES permits to be able to use that water, to be able to put it in a river, put it in a lake, use it in ag or industry. Or the one that really excites me is the potential to recharge aquifers across the state. So we're going to go from throwing away water, and there's also a seismic aspect that has created problems. That is going to be new water for the state of Texas, just like seawater desal can be, just like brackish desal can be. So the regulatory aspects are getting lined up. We're going to do this demonstration to show what's being done in other parts of the world. And so that'll be a new water source. And the way Texas geography is, if it can benefit the rivers and the systems in West Texas, it has a ripple effect all the way to the coast and in reverse also.
Okay. I'll just add a couple of other things, Peter. What's unique to Texas is we have some of the lowest energy costs in not only the United States, but from around the world. We also have a well-educated workforce. So if you start to put all these things together, the well-educated workforce, the regulatory requirements, the low cost of money, and the low cost of energy, there's no reason why Texas can't be one of the lowest cost providers of desalinated waters, not only in the United States, but from around the world.
Okay. Looks like we have about 10 or 12 minutes left. Let me hit a couple of questions. One of the main things that we do is we work with the legislature to, one, educate and promote and clean up some of the laws. And so let's talk about some of the legislative issues. And probably, Justin, you want to kind of highlight some of the things that we do and what our purpose is and maybe what we've accomplished.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that we've done over the years, we've touched on, I think, a little bit of everything related to brackish water, produced water, and so on. But some of the things that we've done is implement and streamline a process through the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to to design and build desalination plants. And that was a big time saver, the way it was done previously. So that, I think that was one of our first big wins. We are involved in a lot of the helping to streamline a lot of the seawater desalination efforts. Intakes and outfalls tend to be the big ones, more so I think than the process, the desalination process itself. And then, yeah, with the consortium and looking at these other alternative approaches to utilize or beneficial reuse of water within the state. I mean, this is the produced water thing is something. This is our second session looking at this, and this time coming up with, as Kyle mentioned earlier, the consortium to look at all these beneficial reuse and things that not just the water. In some regards, the water is the annoying byproduct. That some of the things that you can get out of that are actually sellable products that we need in this country. But that taken broadly speaking, I mean, every session there's been a bill. We've not always had, they've not always been huge things, but they are. But you can't always get a lot done in one session. You kind of have to take it piece by piece as you go along. And so we've been patiently looking for those issues that have caused desalination to really, why is it not being used? Why are people not thinking about it? And so we think about that stuff and then educate both public and our legislators to help them, because I think in our legislature we do have a lot of, to go back to maybe to your earlier question about some good things. We do have leadership in our legislature that is interested and understands the problem, and they're willing to put forth these things and bring groups together, stakeholders, which we are always a part of in order to create the best outcomes for the state.
And Kyle lives at the Capitol this time of year. Do you have anything to add, Kyle?
No, my chairman was quite. I think he covered all the high points. Probably the biggest hurdle that we had, and Justin touched on it, was misconception about desal, and this automatic response. Well, you can't do it because it's too expensive, and it's taken a long time to get people. Decision makers, in particular folks at the legislature, to think about desalination in a different way. And of course, we have turnover every cycle and new people coming in, so that education process is always ongoing. But we've made some progress, and as Justin mentioned, we have some real proponents in both the House and our Senate who believe in it and help us try to move some of these issues along. So it's been a massive education process to this point, and honestly that never stops. But as Justin mentioned, with the bills that have passed and the regulatory changes we've achieved, we are making progress.
Bill, let me mention one other area where is, in a sense, new water too. And that is the work that's been done in Texas on water reuse. And we were before not the most efficient in conserving that water. And I think Carlos was both at TCEQ and the Water Board when a lot of this took place. There's a lot of leadership going on now in water reuse. Indirect water reuse, even direct potable reuse. Some of you may remember a decade ago with a drought that hit the state. Places like Wichita Falls were within days of running out of water, and they took the lead along with Big Spring, and they're able to put in place reuse systems now that stretch that water. Another area that we see a lot and work in is in industrial settings where they don't just pass that water through once. We've got technologies now, our member companies do, that can help squeeze that water, reuse that water. So that conservation aspect has made a lot of progress from a regulatory point of view. It's doable. So I think you're going to see both in the reuse and in some cases that'll be combined with desal technologies that will continue to make progress in that area also.
Okay. Let's, one of the biggest hurdles, I guess, related to seawater desalination is cost, and maybe share some experience with some potential funding with like the Water Development Board or other aspects. It still costs money. It's, you know, there's not a whole lot of free money out there. So, you know, I don't know that there's no added write-ins anymore on too much related to federal government when you use 75% grants, and doesn't occur anymore. So anybody want to tackle a little bit of funding that they have experience with?
What I would highlight, and again, going back to the interest in the audience to hearing more positive news, is Texas has a program that not only has the ability to provide long-term funding assistance at below market rates, where the Water Development Board actually buys down the AAA credit rating that they get. And so it is not uncommon for them to offer you a loan out of SWIFT that is 35 basis points below what the board itself borrows it from the market. But more importantly, when it comes to these kind of projects, they have the ability to lend for planning, design, and acquisition of these kind of projects, funds that are completely deferred. And they're deferred for at least 8 years, principal and interest, or until construction begins. And that can greatly assist in moving projects forward. So I'll offer that as one example.
I would just add, there's no shortage of money. Texas has the best public funding capability of any state, and trust me, the U.S. and Texas is awash in money looking for a home in water infrastructure. It still comes down to one thing that's missing, and that's a customer base prepared to commit to buy the water. That's the one missing factor. If somebody can come up with a take or pay contract, whether a municipality owns a facility or whether a private entity owns it, that water will materialize, but there's got to be a commitment to buy the water.
So that we're getting close here. One quick question. We have about 3 minutes, and one of the things that's kind of near to my concern is, and the need for diversity, is the security aspects of plants and potential attacks, because without water, you know, you can't live. And I know that we have plants that are semi-secure, but not in the sense protecting from, you know, various attacks. So I think that bodes well to diversifying our resources as well. So anyway, so Betty, if you would put up the last slide. Anyway, I want to thank the panelists. I thought it was a good discussion. I probably have a dozen more questions. We'll probably do this for 2 hours, but I need to go get a glass of wine. And everybody thinks I'm a wino on this board, but I'm not really.
It's sacramental. That's okay. That's allowed.
It is. Okay. Okay, so it's the last slide. If you can pull that one up. There. It's a shameless plug for Texas Desal 2021. So if you like this session, you're going to love our Desal 2021, September 15th to 16th, and it will be virtual, so you don't have to travel. Maybe next year we'll have it be in person. You can meet all these wonderful guys in person. So with that, I will close, and thank you very much for attending. And if you got any questions, contact these guys. They're the smart ones of the bunch.